I was very pleased to see that I had a chance to talk after Renz, because Renz has established, along with Tony Peratt, a perfect opportunity for us. This opportunity is to work with the electric universe and work with the principle of plasma formation seen in the ancient sky. And with those as a clear and inescapable reference, we can begin to pose questions as to claimed planetary roles and configurations that in many respects match perfectly configurations that I had reconstructed myself in the early 70s, 72 to 74, involving planets. So there's this question hanging over us, did this have anything to do with planets? Now I'm going to talk about planets from start to finish. And this is bedrock for me. Planets were a part of these plasma discharge configurations, and I believe that can be demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt. However, it's not necessary for you to think planet when I speak of Mars, Venus, or Saturn. It's not necessary. If you can imagine something else presenting the formation that is defined by the images drawn on stone and images retained through design elements over millennia, if you have another explanation for that, then that will be only helpful to increase the dynamic of the discussion and work through the possibilities. Now, I want to pose a question for you relating to the importance of all of this. You are a scientist exploring the natural world, an astronomer, cosmologist, planetary scientist, exploring the physical universe and planets. You are a historian exploring issues of human history. You are an archaeologist, an anthropologist. Now, what's the most important thing for you to know? The answer to both questions is exactly the same if there's anything to what we're suggesting here. The most important thing for you to know is the message of world mythology. Because if there's a coherent message here, it's going to bring the electric universe with it. And it's going to bring planetary history with it. And if there's nothing to this message, then, of course, there's no value to know the message of world mythology. But everyone now has to keep an open mind. We're working with the structure, the substructure of human memory, the points of agreement between the different cultures. My contention is that there is an extraordinary unity to this substructure. Every recurrent theme is vitally connected to every other recurrent theme. And after the myth-making epoch, there never arose another archetype. That's telling us something very important about the nature of that myth-making epoch. You will not understand any of these recurrent themes without the celestial provocation. The unity comes from the predictive, explanatory power of that celestial provocation. I'm going to have to race through portions of this presentation to make as much headway as possible to give you a sense of context. So at times, you're just going to be absorbing images, kind of intuitively sensing the relationship between some of the themes when I pause and say a little bit more about a particular theme. So to establish context for newcomers, in particular, I'm going to go quickly because I think most people here don't need a whole lot of background information. If there's any truth to what is being suggested here, then it is a challenge to everything we've been told. We all know of Emmanuel Velikovsky. I was the founder of the Pensée magazine series. Velikovsky was emphasizing planetary instability, electrical activity associated with unstable planetary events, and he insisted that mythology does count as evidence. Why the fears of planetary gods? And in wrestling with this question, were the planets involved? You have to deal with every point of agreement in the ancient cultures about planets, and that includes the fear with respect to the movement of planets. When the first astronomers began to record a connection between the myths and planetary or celestial bodies that could be identified as planets by their periods, they said these bodies were the gods of the archaic era. Have the planets always moved on their present courses? That's the underlying question. Once you begin to explore the issue from the vantage point of planetary identification. This was my inspiration originally from Velikovsky, and Wal Thornhill and I both always stop to honor the original inspiration from Velikovsky, even though we came to a clear conclusion that Velikovsky was not correct on many particulars. There were certain fundamental principles of a Velikovskyan reconstruction that will guarantee that he will eventually emerge recognized as one of the great pioneers of the 20th century. My book, The Saturn Myth, published in 1980 by Doubleday. You can follow me around and watch me stare into space in this video. The key turning point for me was 1997, and it was then that Wal Thornhill arrived in my office from Australia ahead of a conference, and Wal convinced me, over a 30-day period, he convinced me that what I had reconstructed based on ancient images and storytelling were plasma discharge configurations. He noted the scalability of plasma and the symmetry that can emerge in response to the intensity of the electric discharge. Wal and I are now collaborating, and I would say that collaboration is only going to extend in coming years as other people are coming into our circle. I want to talk about Tony Peratt for just a moment, and if there is time I'll get back to Peratt instabilities, but there's an interesting history that some of you will know, but perhaps most do not know, and that was the way in which Tony got involved in the study of rock art. Before this time, which was September of 2000, he had no interest in rock art, even though his backyard virtually was filled with rock art in the Los Alamos vicinity. I had reconstructed a form I called the chain of arrows. This is one representation of it. The image on the right is a female figure. The flared skirt of the goddess takes the form of the chain of arrows. That simply emphasizes that mythical interpretations that were very diverse would in fact converge on the same form. And such as the Mesopotamian goddess skirt has a kind of tower-like form that corresponds with the chain of arrows form in many interesting ways. Same with the Cretan mountain mother. Now I reconstructed this form. Don't worry about what in the name of heaven was on my mind when I was doing that. This form, which was the summit of a mountain emerging between the Earth and the planet Mars. The chain of arrows was the structure running up from that form with Birkeland current filaments reaching outward and upward. But I had no idea what could possibly have caused that embedded cone form. I asked Wal, what would that have to do with plasma? Wal was very confident. I remember this very well. He said it will be discovered to be a plasma discharge form, and he will look into it. Cretan goddess. Then arrived, for that conference in 2000, Tony Peratt, one of the most distinguished authorities on plasma discharge formations, instabilities in the world today. His site, the plasma, it's called the Plasma Universe, is it? It has a ton of valuable information for us. Something very interesting, I hope you can see it up on the upper left of the whiteboard. He drew that out at that event. That was only days after I posed the question for Wal. And I said, Tony, are you aware you just drew the chain of arrows? So he asked me how that evolved, and I described upward entwining filaments, dividing into toroidal, conical embedded formations, and then into a stack of toroids along the axis. And he said, well, that's the evolution of the Pratt instability in the laboratory. So when he got back to Los Alamos, he wrote me and he said, I have to see the rock art. The first image I sent to him was one I was certain, if he knew plasma discharge and there was any connection here, he would recognize this as such. And the moment he saw this image, I know from his expressions back to me, he knew his life was going to be completely different. He recognized everything in that, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it is a plasma discharge. And he enumerated the particulars for me. I wish we had time to go over some of these things. That's kind of a three-dimensional representation I did just to emphasize the three-dimensionality of a transparent configuration. These things are like champagne glasses and flat-floored dishes and so on. You're looking right through them. It's all transparent. The eye mask at the bottom is a global form. And incidentally, with respect to directions, however you might interpret this, everything I sent him, I said, was seen in the southern hemisphere. So this matter about the view south didn't come as a surprise or some kind of dismaying experience for me. And personally, I wouldn't care where the axis was anyway. But there's a period of wandering and dismemberment and exile. There's a phase in all of this that has to be taken into account whenever formations like this, because these are the forms that are connected to the mythological theme of wandering, death, dismemberment, displacement. This is the simulation behind the eye mask form. Now, you folks have probably seen the stick man. I'd seen these all over the world, but I had never even noticed something. And I was good at noticing patterns, but I'd never noticed the two dots from around the world, which Tony unequivocally identified as the sources of synchrotron radiation within a torus. You're looking right through that inner tube, that tubular circular torus. You're looking right through it, edge on, and that's where the deadly synchrotron radiation source stands. Three-dimensional representation, again emphasizing the transparency. Record that on stone and it would look like that. Tony's geometric representation. And then came, since this is all in Thunderbolts of the Gods, I hope you don't mind, point here is all those Greek formations of the thunderbolt below. I see that there's no title there, but those are all from Greece, and every one of those forms of the cosmic thunderbolt is a variation on that bipolar form. Another point here is that it's been demonstrated quite conclusively that an effective approach to the points of agreement between the ancient cultures will direct scientific investigation, and it's already happened. I mean, that's what happened with the chain of arrows, for example. But an issue came up immediately. I sent to Tony these formations with multiple chains of arrows, and he said, but we only got one. I sent him this image. I said, that's the planet Mars. Between Earth and Mars, there were multiple chains of arrows. He said, well, maybe it was the one, but it was rotating, and it's kind of like a time-lapse image. I said, that can't be, Tony. There's every reason in the world, from the nuances of the descriptions of that column, to believe that it was multiple chains of arrows. So he actually piggybacked on a multi-million-dollar experiment, a variation in which the contact, or the electrode, was given a more spherical football form, and he called me the day after that experiment and said, you won't believe what I got. Multiple chains of arrows. I'm just giving this as one of dozens of examples of how plasma science can actually take pointers from the reconstruction historically to pose questions and then answer them for us. Now, laboratory, this is just a little too far. Perhaps most of you already know of the blueberries on Mars. Martian geology, planetary science as a whole, is going to be vitally involved in determining whether electrical, intensely energetic events characterize planetary history across the board. He produced the Martian blueberries in the laboratory by nothing less, nothing else than an electric spark. He produced variations on the Valles Marineris on Mars with electric sparks and so on. Then a major breakthrough, I believe, will come from an analysis of the spiders in the southern hemisphere, the cryptic region of Mars, the south polar region. By studying the pictures, I produced a hypothesis relating to proton clouds arriving at Mars and provoking responses from electrons. I'm short-circuiting the details here. And that hypothesis, which I formulated in the fall, was amazingly matched by an accident, by an experimentalist in our circle with no advanced credentials whatsoever, but he took nothing but a charged CRT screen, and the entire sequence that I had suggested for the production of the Martian spiders, which was, it began with an excavation by spotting and then a Lichtenberg ravine network, and followed by a Lichtenberg ridge system as ice descended back to a more positively charged surface. And that's exactly what he got with, on the CRT screen. So what is happening on planets now is going to direct our attention to higher energy events in the past, and ultimately will have a direct contribution to make on the planetary hypothesis involved here. Many, many ways in which that will happen. This is CRT screen, not the planet Mars. Now you all know that he is indeed a giant of a scholar. I've just been more impressed with Rens Vandersloot than I think any researcher I have ever known. He's just got boundless energy, intelligence, and the ability to organize material. It's just going to have a stupendous effect. Now, to get to the heart of some of this, and because Rens has covered this, the myth of the Golden Age, the only point I would want to drive home here is that the mythic themes, there's a few themes I'm enumerating here, a few themes they are inseparably related. The Doomsday event was the culminating event of the dragon in the sky is the form, the fiery serpent, the long-haired, the feathered serpent, seen in the sky in that collapse of cosmic order. What was the age of gods and wonders? We have to be able to answer that question. I don't believe that it had anything to do with the human beings on Earth, incidentally. I don't see any possibility of that. But open discussion of these possibilities will really help to drive home whatever is the reasonable conclusion here. Where did the gods live? They did live in the sky. The earliest religious texts really make clear, both in the words and in the pictorial language itself, that these were starry forms in the sky. Why do we no longer believe in the gods? The answer is very clear. Because nature gives no support to the myths. I mean, it was 2,500 years ago that Greek philosophers and naturalists realized there's no connection between these stories and what we observe. How could we believe in them? And that's when drama became comedy. Now this too, we've got to just rush through this. This is because this is repeating something I hadn't expected from Rens. And then emerges the Neolithic bad art. It's like, did the Paleolithic artists not teach their children of the Neolithic epoch to draw? What is this? I love these two petroglyphs. A stick-headed man who has no head because his head is replaced by a duck. Now the moment you hear from Tony Pratt that is a plasma discharge form, the whole profile, your whole picture of the ancient artists, the rock artists, changes. Now we're getting into the relationship between the pictorial images both the petroglyphs and the pictographs, connect to mythology, because nothing dominates world mythology more than the cosmic mountain, as Renz noted, and the world wheel. This wheel has nothing to do with useful wheels, practical wheels, carrying things. This wheel was drawn before human beings knew what a practical wheel could do. And if you follow the evolution forward of the wheel image, the wheel theme, it becomes clear that the ritual reenactments of the wheel, turning it on the wall, a praying wheel, a calendar wheel, or whatever, gradually revealed to human beings the practical uses of the wheel. So our conventional viewpoint of the origins of the wheel is completely backwards. There are certain features of the wheel form around the world that stand out. It's not always 4 spokes of the wheel. The wheel converges on an axle and a hub in many, many different instances. And there are stylistic variations. I love this one. The wheel of the Babylonian so-called sun god Shamash. It's kind of a living demonstration that it's not a practical wheel, because those are rivers. It's the world wheel. It's the paradise of the gods divided by the 4 rivers of life. And why are these the rivers of life? We'll get right to that. The images of the 4 winds, the 4 rivers, the 4 pillars, 4 pathways, 4 arrows launched in the 4 corners, they have nothing to do with the modern ideas, which give them no concrete orientation. These 4 winds are luminous streamers exploding from the axle itself, from the center. And that center point, the axle, is the highlighted point in a vast array of symbols. Egyptian image of the sacred province, you see that looks nothing like the sacred wheel. These are all variations on the language of the spokes. Configuration of sacred space, consistently, irrespective of actual topography, came to be viewed as a mirror of the world wheel. Round city of Mansour, now Baghdad. And not always 4 spokes. That's called the 1,000-spoke wheel, among other things. Gods with wheels, originally 1 wheel, then it begins to be shown at a different angle where you see, well, now it's 2 wheels, and then eventually it can be 4 wheels. But the association with the single wheel, the single chariot wheel, is the overriding theme. Even the throne of Buddha was dominated by the image of the wheel. The Buddha himself was the axle. That's something to hold in mind. The relationship between a kind of a hero, mystic hero figure, and the axle. Footprint of Buddha to a wheel. Ixion, wheel cast across the heaven. I could have given the wheel turning king, whose wheel meant the destruction of the, when it fell, meant the destruction of the world. Later Catherine wheels. The wheel image is just everywhere. Saturn on the left, British seat god Saturn on the right, both identified with the planet Saturn, or as the god Saturn, whom ancient astronomers recognized as the planet. Now does the sun in our sky look like this? That's the statement of the Babylonian astronomical text, and ancient names for the sun, from Helios to Sol to Ra. Helios and Sol were both names archaically of the planet Saturn. And that doesn't come from me. That's established historic fact. Now, you just have to take in what's in these pictures to let nuances register. Is that the sun in the sky? Is that, as others would say, a starburst? the context of the pictures themselves, and this you'll see 1,000 times, it suggests more than one body. And I am going to work through the rest of this presentation, whatever time is left, with the principle of 3 planetary spheres in conjunction, picking the 3 spheres that were named in the earliest astronomies in connection with the behavior identified mythologically for each of the components. There's a large circular sphere, that's the universal sovereign, the prototype of the archaic sun god. There's a central star that is identified with the planet Venus, the prototype of the mother goddess, and within that smaller star burst image, you have a smaller, darker circle or sphere that is the warrior hero figure, Mars. And everything that you can identify through the archetypal history of the gods is contained in the activity of those 3 archetypal figures: universal sovereign, mother goddess Venus, warrior hero Mars. Warrior hero Mars is originally the axle of the wheel. The goddess is originally the hub and spokes of the wheel. And the axle of the wheel does not remain forever just an axle. It goes places. There's material reaching upward toward Venus and exploding out from Venus upward toward Saturn. There are displacements that occur. There are variations of several sorts that occur, and the demands become very rigorous on any test of the hypothesis. I just want to urge that people think in terms of the predictive ability of a model and test it out. Once we begin to put things in motion and acknowledge the movements that are suggested by the historic records, then all kinds of tests emerge if there's any integrity to this. First, you have the images on stone. Is the correspondence complete? You have the historical testimony, the entire witness of the ancient cultures themselves in texts and design elements and so on. You have the perspective from Earth, extremely demanding. You have physical analogies, plasma discharge in the laboratory. You have planetary science, starring patterns and so on that would be implied by these relationships. This implication will become more clear. And it all has to be consistent. Is it even possible that we could maintain consistency? The greatest mistake by people who have followed a particular mythic theme is that they ignored all the others. People have, I think you would pick this up from the summary that Frank Wallace gave, people have found certain mythical themes that they thought, well, wow, I can do something with this. They forgot all of the others. They took 1% and forgot the rest of ancient mythology. That does not work. No theme can be eliminated because all themes arose from the myth-making epoch, which was a human response to a celestial provocation. We give earliest sources the preference for the obvious reason. See, I don't even have time to go through this, but when you think of the primordial unity, like Atum Ra of Egypt, the all, heaven when heaven was close to the earth, the images will consistently lead you to the principle of the great conjunction of the Golden Age, the Golden Age being the opening chapter in the Age of Gods and Wonders. I'm giving you this image of a jetted star or a Herberg-Harrow object just because it looks exactly like an illustration I did in the early 80s of the polar configuration. This is polar jet, star-sized concentrations along the jet, complete violation of everything we were told about what's possible and not possible. Now here's another core principle. There are just 4 absolutely fundamental archetypes. Universal sovereign is that original all-encompassing sphere, the original unity of heaven when heaven was close to the earth, before the differentiation of the mother goddess and the warrior hero, who were the active forces in creation. Everything discussed in the myths has a connection to the myth of creation. I was the first to suggest in 1972, we completely misunderstood the creation myth. The creation myth was something seen in the sky. It was the construction of the land of the gods. That's it. The chaos monster being the terrible aspect of the mother goddess and the warrior hero. So you have a female nuance or a masculine nuance to the chaos monster. And in all instances, I believe, where you have lots of data to work with, you are finding the mother goddess and warrior hero appearing in a terrifying form associated with instability. One story told around the world, just another way of restating the unity here. Now, we talked about life, tree of life, pathways of life, and so on. Life means something very concrete. The sky darkens, that material erupts into life. The streamers of the discharging Venus are the life of the universal sovereign. Life must be comprehended in its most concrete terms. Concrete terms. Just a few examples of the all-encompassing sovereign God, heaven when heaven was close to the earth. Now, the point here is many different mythical images referred to exactly the same thing. Why was the radiant Venus always associated with protection? Why, on shielded designs around the world, do you always see images of the radiant Venus in her different forms? It's for this reason. That central space of the axle was the inapproachable space. These streams were the shout of creation. This was visible material, visible words being ejected in this creation event and filling the sky with material that was considered the raw stuff of creation. It was the raw material out of which the evolving structure that we'll get to, if possible here, emerged. So, yes, it's the object of the hero's quest. The marriage rite is his accession to the throne at the point of the axle, in his unity, his union with the mother goddess. Always at the top of the world. Always at the summit of the mountain of the world. Long-haired goddess, the long hair of the goddess has two different qualities. One is as radial streamers, and another is, in the periods of instability, disheveled hair, shaggy hair, wildly disordered hair. Now, there's the perfected human form on the left, and there's the original form inscribed on stone much earlier in Mesopotamia, and they knew that this star of Venus was a sphere. That really is an inescapable fact. So it's not reasonable to argue that that's a comet. It's not reasonable to say that that's an asteroid. Again, that's the spherical form of the Greek and Latin Venus, and long-haired star means comet. So, of course, it was the great comet as well. Aphrodite, Cometho, Aphrodite being the name, the Greek name of Venus, Cometho being long-haired Venus, long-haired star, meaning astronomically comet. It's by far the most common phrase for the comet in the ancient world. And here, the hair is radiating in these linear streams. And what's the meaning of that? In this analysis, that smaller sphere is the warrior hero, the unborn hero in the womb of the mother goddess. And what hero was not born within the womb of the mother goddess? Apollo is recognized as a very close counterpart of the Latin figure Mars. Apollo was called the axle. And the most common rendering in anthropomorphic terms of the sphere of Mars is as the head of a humanized divine figure. And that head is placed within the sphere of that radiant formation in the sky. And what is the breast of heaven? That's a very in the more archaic languages from the from Hindu to Sumerian to ancient Egyptian, the goddess is quite frequently called the breast of heaven. What does that make the hero? The child, the child at the breast, as you see in this Hindu image. And notice once you give human form to mother and child, you have to start replicating things. Here the emanations are, for obvious reasons, replicated. Here's the child warrior at the breast of the Egyptian Isis. Child on the lap is just a variation of that motif in the ancient world. Well, why was every warrior king a child on the lap of the mother goddess? The lap, the words for lap and words for womb will continuously overlap. I like the dwarf-like reddish figure on one hand in the lighter dress, the female form. Now, it is way, way too much to try to summarize here the variations just in the streamer pattern. They're quite apart from other things that occurred, but we have to try to acknowledge these. First, you have the discharge form that Wall first showed me, and the way the streamers in that particular energetic form, they expand into buds at the end, into these nubbins at the end of the streamer. And so that becomes a test then of the predictive ability of the plasma explanation against ancient images. Now, this is what I am suggesting was in a particular discharge phase seen in the sky, something like that. That puts Mars in the center, and there we have variations on that. That puts the warrior hero in the center of that kind of form, and that was for a very specific reason. That was the unassailable spot, symbolically, for every warrior king. Plant of life is just a variation on that. Again, it's the plant of life, not for esoteric reasons, but because the petals, the streamers of that discharge, were the life of heaven. Relationship between the plant of life and the star in the ancient Sumerian system is very clear, and these are symbols of both on the all-encompassing power of heaven, whose life was what was called the terrifying glory of heaven, identified with the Venus goddess, Inanna. There you see on the same seal in Egypt, the plant of life above and the wheel-like form below it corresponds very closely with the Anglo-Saxon Saturn figure. We've got to speed along here. The head of the hero figure emerging from the plant of life. What a weird concept. But you will find that kind of image pervasive in the ancient world. Eye of heaven, the same sort of thing. Eye, heart, and soul are absolutely synonymous, mythically, symbolically. They all refer to the eye, heart, and soul of the universal sovereign, which subsequently becomes very active. Why the flower or radiant form associated with the leonine figure, and why the hair of the leonine figure presented in such a kind of linear, stylized fashion. There are reasons for all of these things, but you see the star in connection with leonine forms, again, pervasively, and this is from Egypt over to Mesopotamia and beyond. The mane of the lion is the defining quality. The radiance of the eye is the flowing mane. The head of the hero emerging from the leonine form with its shaggy mane. The eye below in its symmetry, in its identity as the heart. These identity, head of Heracles or Hercules emerging from a lion head. These ridiculous notions take on an astonishing integrity. And I'm skipping 99 of every 100 that we could show. Variations in the number of the streamers as suggested here. Also in the in this summary of some of the symbols of Sumerian on, even the counting system in ancient Sumer reflects the number of petals. From 3 to 9 is just identified in terms of the number of petals of the plant of life. First suggestions of some of the displacement that can occur call that the thousand-spoke wheel above, though it's from Italy, not India. The form from Egypt is beginning to suggest a whorl-like apparition. This is extremely dominant in the ancient world, and I am virtually skipping all of that. And there's another form of displacement that is shown in the form from Mesopotamia. And if you want to understand why, when Aphrodite was born from heaven, she floated on a scallop shell, that's all you need to know, is that this kind of form, this kind of displacement, once it was completed, you have a perfect scallop shell. Displacement of Venus gave rise to the undulating serpentine hair of Medusa-type figures. Well, here's the one. This is called, this is not from Sumer, but that exact form you will find in Sumer, and it's called hair star. And hair star, again, being the most common word for comet. Whorl, swastika, triskelion are all associated with whirling hair in heaven. These are not accidental images. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm really going to have to speed along here. Okay, triskelion, a very weird form, but I just said they are inseparably related to the disheveled hair. And you see that. That's the Medusa head. There's the legs of the triskelion emerging from the Medusa head. There, now, here's the scallop shell. All that has occurred is that the thousand-spoke wheel is displaced visually by the displacement of Earth, Mars, and Venus, removing the background theater itself, heaven, the great sphere of Saturn. And now the streamers that are reaching up towards Saturn are seen from this angle, and they give you the perfect scallop shell. And why was Venus, in its departure as the departing life and soul of the universal sovereign, associated with a dove? It's the tail of the dove gives you precisely that same form. So scallop shell and dove converge as images of this displacement, this birth of Venus on the cosmic waters. And I am here to tell you that there's much more to it. There's a rosette form that we're not going to have a chance to get into, but certainly the artists themselves who inscribed that all over the scallop shell, they knew. There's, again, the association of the angry goddess with the symbolism of the love goddess, the life-giving goddess, Venus, the scallop shell. That's the Medusa superimposed on the scallop shell. That serpentine hair is nothing other than the flutes of the scallop in that phase of displacement. Now, again, we just have to... These are all images of Venus. I mean, these are all images of the mother goddess whom comparative analysis will definitively reveal to be the planet Venus, not a comet, not just some unidentifiable formation in the sky. So a date poem doesn't really quite look like that, but symbolically it does, because this is a sign for the goddess Inanna. And you see the form on the right, and there you see the trunk. I'm skipping virtually everything that has to do with the polar column, which Grens himself discussed. Now, what does the headdress of Tutankhamun have to do with Venus? Well, the answer is everything, because the headdress was identified as the goddess. That is the symbol of the union of the warrior king with the goddess. And when you see it from behind, you understand why. Now, there's a kind of a knot there that is spiraling. If you think visually in terms of the configuration, I've skipped all of this, but it's there coming down from Mars. It's the beard, the descending, vertically descending beard of the warrior hero, which is typically braided or presented as a kind of stack of toroidal forms. This means to be crowned. That's the same symbol, or that hieroglyph is used for to reach the top. To reach the top is to be united with the Mother Goddess. And this is why the coronation ceremonies are always so closely associated with the sacred marriage. It's one and the same. See, they could develop very elaborate artistic renderings that really do violence to the simplicity of the original form. But it's there. This is the crown. This is the throne of the warrior hero. Same basic form. Now, this does not look anything like, that image on the right, does not look anything like the suggested form. But it was said that Isis, with her hair, created a papyrus swamp as protection for the newborn child, Horus. Now there you have the radiating streamers and the flowering bud at the end, and in that particular form, which is the unnatural form. What you look for is the connection to an archetype which will, in many instances, violate the form of the natural object that served as the symbol. Now, again, we're talking about protection. What are the symbols of the protection inscribed on the helmet of the warrior? There are symbols. So we cannot avoid, we cannot escape this relationship of the warrior hero to the Mother Goddess. Now, we're talking about a certain form of displacement here that continues through variations in the number of the streamers. And you have to ask then, well, once displacement occurs in this form, what does it look like? And I am here to tell you that this is what it looks like. The seven-headed serpent, and much more, seven-rayed star, and many other things. But I believe this can be, again, confirmed at such a high level of confidence. It's only necessary that it be reviewed. Now that doesn't look all that much like that form. That looks a little bit more like it. And that looks almost exactly like it. And the farther back you go, the closer you will tend to get to the archaic form. So the eight-rayed star, eight-rayed plant of life, in this phase of displacement gives rise to seven. But with further displacement, this is what you get. And incidentally, I did not do these myself. I told Rick Smith, who was database manager at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, what I expected he would get if he would displace the Earth and Mars to a certain level consistent with the scallop shell displacement, that you would get this, and indeed that's what he showed. And this is the hand of heaven, but it's more than that. There's the hand. The artists in these instances had to know there was this connection. Many, many more instances of the hand in relationship to the eye, you know. Warrior skirt. That is called the half star, the skirt of the warrior figure here, the dancing god. But his crown is essentially the same kind of form, and he's holding it again in his hand. And the Aztec scholars call this the half star. Oh, and it's Venus, incidentally. They do not doubt that it is Venus. First form of the Mother Goddess. This has to, of necessity, be a bit erratic here to make headway. Now I'm going back to the first activity of creation, the creation myth, the beginning of differentiation, and there is a triform. It is nothing more than a three-rayed star before the rays are projected fully, or when the rays have retracted sufficiently to give a perfect triangular form. The triangle being the acknowledged universal form of the archaic Mother Goddess. I always thought, well, a triangle, that's just a little bit too convenient, a little bit too symmetrical, isn't it? No. These are from Barbara Walker's Encyclopedia on the Mother Goddess. When two triangles were juxtaposed, there was a general habit to regard that as the male and female forms in conjunction. The vertical pyramidal form being the masculine and the inverted form being the feminine. Relationship of the eye to the pyramidion representing in the archaic texts of Egypt representing the primal seed. The activity of the primal seed ejected by Atum Ra was the source of the active energy of creation. What happens to the seed in its differentiation into the male form and the female form becomes the force that gives rise to all of the cosmic structure. That's the warrior hero and the mother goddess, originally in conjunction, then separating through differentiation, in which the hero becomes the pillar of the world and the sorts of things that Ren's enumerated. Triangulum in relationship to the Medusa, there was obviously on the part of the symbolist some knowledge of that connection. Forms from Oklahoma tend to preserve some of the more archaic nuances. There's the Triskelion again, we don't need that. Okay, now, I don't think we need to worry about this in order to jump ahead. Yes, there was a crescent on Saturn. Yes, it rotated with the cycle of day and night because it was polar, it was axial. It turned with the movement of the sun. It was above during the phase of dimming. It was below at midnight of the phase of growing most bright. The circle of night and day was one of the overriding images of the ancient world. I really think we should. Mars descending, that formation above we'll get to in just a moment. In its descent, a downward projecting beard or peg or nail or dagger. This is the projection. It's projecting, as you see on the image on the right, it's projecting down as the stem of the plant of life. It's the tongue of the angry goddess. Now, if that is Mars on the right, where's Mars on the image on the left? There you see that image above the mountain. If the mountain is formed by material descending from Mars, it is right there. Mars is right there. It's not being seen as a discrete body, but it was known to be the summit, the pinnacle of the world mountain. Just a quick, momentary look at the incredibly diverse forms of the world mountain. In the Saturn myth, the discussion of the world mountain, I think it took up about 25% of the whole block, 20 to 25%. Okay, we're talking about the descent of Mars and the formation of the conical crown of the warrior hero in relation to that. The material stretching up from Mars toward Venus is always identified, virtually always identified as the mother goddess, and that's because both were very white, very light, very luminous. Now here's a contention, and this is getting into a level of detail we won't have time to cover, but it's at the level of detail that the greatest tests occur. The contention is this universal sun sign, it includes the connection, the conjunction of Mars and Venus in the center of a huge sphere that is identified astronomically, most archaically, with Saturn. What is occurring here is not that white circle is inside is material exploding from the equator of Mars and moving up the axis to culminate in the sphere of Venus, which you are not seeing. In this particular phase, you are not seeing Venus, but the observer knows that Venus is there. Now, you see this kind of juxtaposition. If you take that circle and you amplify it a little bit, you'd really see a ring. This is what you have. And this is the Aten in Egypt. So what I'm saying is the material running from Mars up toward Venus is defined symbolically by what happens to that stream. It becomes the serpent of the Uraeus, for example, which you see, the twin Uraeus serpents projecting from that. But you have to go with what happens to that stream to understand these identifications. The Shin rope below, the rope that is stretched around to create the boundary of the celestial kingdom, that's defined by what happens to that stream. So the Aten, the Uraeus serpent, the Shin bond will never be understood until you understand what was seen in space and what happened to it. That's what it looked like. Now, how could we know that? Well, because we drew it that way. So this does not prove anything, but it sets up an incredible requirement. I had Rick Smith configure a stream between Mars and Venus that would give the form of the white crown, and he could not get that by keeping the bodies on axis. He had to remove Mars, or the Earth, from the axis, and then he got that. But that sets up a rigorous set of demands. I wear the white crown. This is from the pyramid text. Like the Aten on the head of Amun-Ra. Now, I can tell you that this is one of those identities you can stake your life on. I've just given you a quote, but the pyramid texts are filled with quotes that identify the Aten and the white crown and the Uraeus serpent and the Shin bond as the same thing. I know my mother, the white crown, the serpent goddess. These are all the same thing. Now, put this where we put it, and the demands just grow. The sun is shining off of Saturn, and it's illuminating the white crown at the same time, and there is this archetypal moment at which it is pointing due west, if you treat this as being the celestial north. And I don't care where that is personally. And this is sunrise. Now, because the Egyptians paid as much attention to the daily cycle as to anything else in life, they represented that incessantly in art and in texts. This becomes an acid test. There was the sunset and the sunrise image, and there was only one hieroglyph in Egypt that could represent the illuminated portion of that conical crown, and it's the feather. Now, an ostrich feather. What a strange connection. But that becomes a test then. And what does the ostrich feather mean?